Okay, let's talk about the MLA Works Cited page. This is where you're going to collect all your sources and acknowledge them for your readers so they know where you got all your information. A Works Cited page will come at the end of your paper. It will be the last thing. It should start on a new page. It should not start at the bottom of a page that already has writing. It should start on a fresh page. It should be double spaced with no extra spaces between entries. If you look at these examples, there's no extra space between any of these entries. They're all exactly double spaced. There's not even an extra space between the title Works Cited and the first source. Everything is perfectly even double spaced. The title Works Cited is centered at the top. These are what's called hanging indents. You see how normally when you indent something, you indent in. Well, for these ones, the first line of each entry sticks out and everything else is pushed in. So it's called a hanging indent because it looks like the first line is hanging over the top. And finally, entries should be alphabetized by whatever the first letter of the entry is. So we got a B, we got a J, R, S, and T, alphabetized. So now let's talk about what goes in your Works Cited and how you format these entries. So this template comes straight from the MLA handbook, and it tells us how we're supposed to organize each entry in our Works Cited page. First, if an author is listed, we start with that. Last name, then first name. Now, sometimes you'll come across sources, especially on the internet, where there is no author listed. In that case, here's what you want to do. If there is no author listed, this is what the MLA handbook says to do. When a work is published without an author's name, do not list the author as anonymous. Instead, skip the author element and begin the entry with the work's title. In other words, if you can't see an author listed anywhere, then just skip it. Don't make something up. Don't add in the title of the website or any other weird thing. You just skip it. Likewise, some places you'll see weird things, like if you do a citation generator and a computer does it for you. Sometimes you'll see something like National Geographic listed as the author and then again as the publisher later. You don't do that. MLA says you may skip the author element and begin the entry with the work's title. So you skip the author again. If there's no author listed, if it's not a human being, skip it, unless the source tells you exactly what it wants to be listed as. So, if you have an author, you list it. If there is no author, you start with the title. But if there's an author, you do the author, then there's a period, then you have the title. The title is usually, if it's an article, it's usually going to be in quotation marks, and there's a period. Then you have what's called the container, and that includes a lot of different information. The container is where the article comes from. So let's talk about what a container can be. Let's say you get an article from a newspaper. The article is the source. The container is the newspaper. Let's say you get an article on a website. The article is the source. The website is the container. It's what contains the article. If you get a poem out of a book of poems, the book is the container. The poem is the source. A song is the source, but the album that the song is on is the container. If you cite a YouTube video, the video itself is the source. YouTube is the container. It's where you found the source. And in almost every case, the title of the container is italicized. So let's practice. This is an article I found on the internet. So if I was going to cite this, first comes the author. This actually has two authors. In this case, it would be Chang, comma, Kenneth, and then and Ivan Nechepurenko. So you do last name, first name for the first author, but then the second author, which you don't need to alphabetize. We do this because we're alphabetizing by the last name. You would just have the name in the normal order, Ivan Nechepurenko. So we have the authors, then we have a period. Then we have the title up here. Here's where we find the title. Now the title, since it's the title, it has to be punctuated. Titles of articles are in quotation marks. So this would be in quotation marks, and there would be a period. So we've got our authors, we have the title. Now we get into the stuff about the container. Where am I getting this from? What contains this article? Well, that's right here. It's the New York Times. Now, since it's the container, I would italicize that. And after we have the container, we put a comma. So now we've got author, title, title of container. Contributor would be if there was a listed editor or something, but there's not. Version would be if this was like the remix or the remastered version or another version, but there is no other version of a website article, so we don't have to contribute. We don't have a version. Number would be if like this was volume 2 of something, but it's not. So none of those fit what we're doing. This article has none of those things. So if it has none of those things, then we skip it. So we skip this, this, and this. Now, there is a publisher. Where do we find that? There is a publication date. Where do we find that? And then we'll have to talk about location. So, where's the publisher? If you scroll all the way to the bottom of most websites, you'll get something that looks like this. And usually right there, you'll see some kind of copyright symbol with the year it was copyrighted, and then you get the publisher. So the publisher of this article is the New York Times Company. Now, because that's a little different than the container title, which was just the New York Times, we should include it. If it was exactly the same as the container title, if that just said New York Times, then we wouldn't have to include it because you'd just be repeating. But because it says New York Times Company, we should include it. So we've got our publisher. Now we need a publication date. If we go back to the top, right near where there's an author, it's usually, if you're looking at especially some kind of news article or something, there will be the date right after the title and the author's listed. So we get a specific publication date. So we plug that in. Here's a weird thing about the date, though, when you plug it in. The United States and I believe Micronesia are the only countries in the world who style the date like this, putting the month first, then the day, then the year. Everybody else does 26 June 2022 because it goes small to bigger to biggest. So because we're way outnumbered, this is the style we use in the Works Cited because more people are using this than this. So we've got our publisher, comma, publication date, comma. Now the location for the website, it would be a URL. So you would just copy and paste the URL complete right after the publication date, and then there's a period. So that's an example of how to use this template with a website. There are other things like databases and stuff that we need to talk about.